We went to the engineers and talked to them about what projects did they see needed to be done and what was the priority they felt like was appropriate for accomplishing those. And so our engineers put together a plan to complete some projects with the idea that we would take that and try to match some funding to it. What we found in the water side was that they had a pretty stable, steady approach, a plan which could generally be broken down into a year-by-year approach. And it was, we found a way to match cash, pay-as-you-go financing for that list of projects for water. And so during that time, we adjusted the rates on the capital side for pay-as-you-go capital replacement in the water fund with a dedicated funding source. And so that money goes into a capital project fund, and those projects are executed from that capital project fund on a routine basis. During that time, Council did allocate a portion of that revenue to go into the operating fund to increase the commitment to maintenance of existing valves and pipe, especially valves. The engineers tell us that part of the problem with valves is that when they're not regularly turned, there's corrosion and deposits which inhibit the ability of the valve to be turned. And if they're not turned regularly, it's just like those little valves we've got under the sink at home. They corrode, and eventually they get where they won't turn, and you get in there, and if you turn hard enough, they break. It's the same thing on a much larger scale for the infrastructure for our water distribution system. And so Council wanted the engineers advocated and Council funded a team to help maintain that system in the ground. So water was pretty straightforward in that we had a relatively easy plan to develop a funding stream for, and that's what happened. On the wastewater or sewer side, it was a little more complex because there was a large dollar value of projects which needed to be completed in relatively short order. High dollars up front in the plan with a smaller, more steady approach for regular replacement. And so with the sewer activity, we split the capital into two components. A component which would need to be addressed up front right away, and then a component which could be done on an annual basis, much like we were doing with water. For the annual replacement portion, that was a relatively easy thing to develop the rates for, and that portion was pretty straightforward like the water. The portion of the capital projects which needed attention right away in sewer, we needed to borrow money for, and so we issued bonds so that those projects could be completed immediately to prevent additional line failures. And the way we manage that from a financial perspective is we get the projects done right away, we get the money up front, and then we schedule a steady cash flow stream to make the debt service payments until the debt's satisfied. And so with sewer, we were able to, through the use of debt, accelerate some projects that needed to happen right away, but smooth the impact to the rates by paying that out over time. Now, obviously, when you borrow money, you pay interest, and so your buying power over time isn't quite as good as it would be if it was pay-as-you-go. However, we were in a situation where those improvements were necessary in a short time frame, and we didn't have the luxury of time to accomplish those through a pay-as-you-go strategy. We had a big pipe that needed to be replaced right away because we had a portion of the system that was failing, and so in order to accomplish that without additional breaks, we borrowed the money. I think that's starting to be a pattern, is that when the crews are able to shut those valves and isolate a piece of pipe, they can get the pressure down and they can work to patch or replace a piece of pipe. But when those valves don't function, the water runs and it's a dangerous situation. There were some safety issues where this pipe, this last main break, really split a very large piece of pipe, and could have been a very dangerous situation for those crews. So the operation of valves is critical. It appears from a layman's perspective for the repair of those segments. For example, in permits and inspections, those are largely user fees. The activity which occurs over there is because a particular citizen or business is attempting to accomplish something, and so the inspections which are necessary are a direct result of someone's pursuit of a project. So the person or business which is attempting to complete a project or execute a project pays the fee, and the fee is designed to cover the cost of providing that service. There are other revenues which are more general in nature and not necessarily tied to a particular cost. For example, sales tax is not tied to the provision of any particular city service, but used generally to provide public safety, fundamental types of services. So in general, we try to keep those revenues and expenses matched up. There are occasionally times when those resources can be shifted and used for other purposes. Usually we try to keep that together in an orderly fashion so that we don't create instability or difficulty from a budgeting and operating perspective. But we do try to keep an open mind about possibilities. Sometimes we hear about half-cent sales tax, and why can't half-cent sales tax be used for this or that? In our case, our half-cent sales tax was proposed with a particular set of projects on the ballot and for a particular time period. In order to effectively execute the proposal that was contained in the ballot, Council and the City of San Angelo Development Corporation Board try to stay on track with what the ballot requires and allows in order to accomplish what they told the citizens they were going to accomplish. If, for example, the half-cent sales tax existed without specific items contained in the ballot, there would be more latitude available. Not complete latitude, but more latitude to supplement other projects, to accelerate street projects, to accelerate other projects, to the extent that those projects were allowed by the statute under which the Development Corporation was formed. But because our sales tax ballot contained specific projects, that restricted the money to those ballot items. And so, by design, that item was restricted. And it was created that way in order to provide citizens with the assurance that the money just wouldn't be spent here and there, that it was going to be spent on particular items which citizens saw as priorities. And so that's what Council and the COSA DC Board is trying to do, trying to stay true to that ballot.